The heat from the Arizona sun lay heavy on Silver Creek. The air shimmered above the scorched dirt road like smoke from an unseen fire. Clara Hayes stepped down from the stagecoach, her traveling dress already clinging to her skin despite the early hour. She had forgotten how fierce the desert could be, how it stripped away all pretense and left only truth beneath its relentless gaze. 12 years in Boston had softened her memories of this land, but not erased them. Never erased them. "Clara, darling, do be careful." Jace Carter's voice cut through her reverie as he offered his hand. His palm was damp, unaccustomed to this climate, and his fine suit looked absurdly formal against the rough-hewn buildings of the frontier town. "This place is rather primitive." She allowed him to help her down, noting how his nose wrinkled at the smell of horse and dust and sun-baked earth. Jace had insisted on accompanying her from Boston, eager to assess whether Silver Creek was suitable for his future wife. The wedding was planned for autumn, a respectable ceremony that would unite two proper families and secure Clara's position in polite society. It should have been everything she wanted. Jace was handsome in a refined way, educated, well-mannered. He represented safety, stability, a future without uncertainty. Her adoptive parents had been thrilled when he proposed. So why did her heart feel like a caged bird beating frantically against invisible bars? Miss Hayes, a weathered woman in a plain cotton dress, approached her face lined by wind and worry. "I'm Ruth Gable, head of the school board. We're so pleased you've accepted the teaching position." Clara smiled, genuinely glad to focus on something purposeful. "I'm honored to be here, Mrs. Gable. I've looked forward to returning to Arizona." Ruth's eyes flickered with surprise. "Returning? You've been here before." The question hung in the air, and Clara felt Jace's hand tighten possessively on her elbow. She had told him only the barest details of her childhood, how she'd been orphaned young, raised in a church home, and eventually adopted by a Boston family. She had never mentioned the Apache warrior who had saved her life. How could she put into words the memory that haunted her dreams? Strong arms lifting her from the desert floor, a voice speaking words of comfort in a language she couldn't comprehend, dark eyes that held more kindness than she'd ever known. "I was very young," Clara said carefully. "I barely remember it." It was a lie. She remembered everything. Ruth led them through the town, pointing out the general store, the church, the small schoolhouse that would be Clara's domain. Jace made disparaging comments about the crude buildings and rough inhabitants, but Clara barely heard him. Her eyes were drawn to the mountains in the distance, purple and imposing against the endless blue sky. Somewhere out there, in those wild spaces, was the man who had given her life back to her. Did he ever think of her? Did he remember the frightened little girl he'd rescued? The thought was foolish, she told herself firmly. He had been a stranger performing an act of mercy. Nothing more. She had built him into something larger in her imagination and transformed a brief encounter into a fantasy that no real man could match. "Clara, are you listening?" Jace's irritated tone snapped her back to the present. "I said we should inspect your lodgings before, good heavens. What is that?" Clara followed his gaze to the edge of town where several Apache men stood near a trading post. They were speaking with the proprietor, their voices low and measured. Even from a distance, they carried themselves with a dignity that put Jace's stiff posture to shame. Her heart began to pound without reason. "Local savages," Ruth said with obvious discomfort. "They come to trade sometimes. We tolerate them because Mr. Henderson insists it's good for business, but decent folk keep their distance." "Savages." Clara's voice came out sharper than intended. "They're people, Mrs. Gable, human beings with their own culture." And before she could say more, Jace's scandalized whisper cut her off. "What are you thinking? These are the very people who terrorized settlers for decades. Your progressive Boston notions have no place here." But Clara wasn't listening. One of the Apache men had turned, and even across the distance, she felt the impact of his gaze like a physical blow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with long black hair that fell past his shoulders, He wore a mixture of traditional and trade clothing, buckskin pants, a cotton shirt, a red cloth tied around his head, and he was staring directly at her. The world narrowed to that single point of connection. Everything else, Jace's voice, Ruth's chatter, the bustle of the town faded into meaningless noise. Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. She knew him. Not from memory exactly. The boy who had saved her had been young, barely more than a teenager. This man was fully grown, weathered by sun and hardship. His face was marked by experiences she could only imagine. But his eyes, those dark, fathomless eyes, were the same. Time collapsed. 12 years vanished in an instant. She was 8 years old again, terrified and lost. And he was the only safe thing in a world that had turned to nightmare. He took a step toward her, and she saw recognition dawn in his face too. His expression shifted from casual interest to shock, then to something that made Clara's knees weak. A hunger so intense, it should have frightened her. Instead, it answered something deep in her own soul. "Clara." Jace tugged at her arm, oblivious to the moment. "Come along." She let herself be pulled away, but as she walked, she glanced back over her shoulder. Zane stood motionless, his eyes locked on her, watching her fade into the crowd. Even from a distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze, the unspoken conversation between them, hanging like a taut rope. That night, in the small room above the schoolhouse that would serve as her quarters, Clara stood at the window and gazed up at the stars. They were so much brighter here than in Boston. So close, she felt she could reach up and gather them in her hands. Somewhere out there, under that same vast sky, Zane was thinking of her. She knew it with the same certainty she knew her own name. "What am I doing?" she whispered into the darkness. "I'm engaged. I have a respectable life waiting for me. I should be happy." But happiness felt like a distant dream, something she'd read about in books but never truly felt. Jace made her feel safe, valued, protected, but not alive. Not like that single electric look from Zane had made her feel this afternoon. No, not a stranger. Her savior. The man who had given her a second chance at life and then vanished like smoke. Below her window, the town settled into sleep. But Clara lay awake for hours, her heart racing with excitement and fear. She had come to Arizona to teach, to fulfill a duty, to prepare for a proper marriage. She had not come to fall in love. But standing in that dusty street, meeting those dark eyes, she felt something shift inside her. A door opening that she'd kept locked for 12 years. And now that it was open, she knew no force on earth could close it again. 3 days passed before Clara saw him again. 3 days spent setting up her classroom meeting, her students enduring Jace's constant complaints about everything from the food to the uncouth locales. 3 days of going through the motions while her mind wandered to forbidden places. She was at the general store selecting supplies for the schoolhouse when the bell above the door chimed. The conversation in the store stilled, instantly replaced by a heavy silence that made her skin prickle. Clara turned to find Zane standing in the doorway, outlined by the harsh sunlight. Up close, he was even more striking than she remembered. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but compelling in a way that made her forget how to breathe. His face was strong, all sharp lines and angles weathered by the wind and sun. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a fierce appearance that should have frightened her. It didn't. Their eyes met, and Clara felt that same electric connection she'd experienced 3 days ago. His expression was neutral, but she saw his hands tighten at his sides, his jaw muscle jump. "We don't serve your kind," the shopkeeper said coldly. "You know that." Zane didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge the insult. He simply continued to look at Clara, and in his eyes she saw a question that made her heart race. "Do you remember?" Clara heard herself say, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is a public establishment. He'll serve him like anyone else." The shopkeeper's face reddened. "Miss Hayes, with all due respect, you don't understand the situation here. These people are customers." Clara interrupted firmly. Unless you'd like me to write to the territorial governor about discriminatory practices, I'm sure he'd be interested to know that businesses in Silver Creek refuse service based on race. It was a bluff. She had no idea if the governor would care, but her tone was confident enough that the shopkeeper hesitated. The other customers muttered among themselves, clearly disapproving of her intervention. Zane's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his features. Then slowly, one corner of his mouth lifted, in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Fine," the shopkeeper grumbled. "Make it quick." Zane moved to the counter with the grace of a mountain lion, all controlled power and predatory awareness. He placed several items on the counter, coffee flour, tobacco. His hands were strong, scarred, capable. Clara found herself moving closer without conscious thought, drawn by an invisible thread. She stopped beside him, close enough to smell the scent of leather sage and something wild that made her head spin. "Thank you," he said quietly. His English was clear but rough. "You didn't have to speak for me." "It was the right thing to do," Clara managed, though her voice came out breathless. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." His dark eyes searched her face, and she saw recognition battling disbelief. "I know you." "Yes," the word was barely a whisper. "You saved my life, a long time ago." The shopkeeper was watching them with undisguised curiosity, and Clara became aware that every person in the store had fallen silent, straining to hear their conversation. She didn't care. Nothing existed beyond this man and the way he was looking at her as if she was something precious and impossible. "The child," he said slowly, wonder coloring his tone. "The little girl with golden hair and frightened eyes. You were lost. You found me." Clara's eyes burned with unshared tears. "You carried me to safety. You saved me when you had no reason to trust a white child, when your people had every reason to hate mine." "I remember," he said softly. "I have never forgotten." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Around them, the store patrons whispered scandalized comments, but neither Clara nor Zane seemed to notice. They were caught in a moment outside of time, two souls recognizing each other across an impossible divide. "I'm Zane," he said. "Clara." She smiled tremulously. "Clara Hayes." "Clara." He repeated her name like a prayer, and something inside her cracked open. The child had become a beautiful woman. Heat flooded her cheeks, and the young warrior became... She trailed off, unable to find the right words. Became what the man who had haunted her dreams for 12 years, the standard against which every other man had been measured and found wanting. "Miss Hayes." Jace's voice shattered the moment like glass breaking. He strode into the store, his face flushed with anger and exertion. "What in heaven's name are you doing? Ruth Gable told me you were seen conversing with..." He stopped abruptly, taking in the scene before him. His expression darkened. "Step away from that savage immediately." Clara didn't move. Couldn't move. "Jace, this is Zane. He saved my life when I was a child. I don't care if he saved the entire territorial army." Jace snapped, grabbing her arm roughly. "You will not associate with these people. It's improper. It's dangerous, and remove your hand from her." Zane's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight of threat that made Jace stumble backward. "Now." Jace's face went pale, then red. "How dare you? I am her fiancé, and I'll thank you too." "Your fiancé treats you roughly." Zane's eyes never left Clara's face. A woman should be cherished, not handled like property. The truth of his words struck Clara like a blow. She had been so focused on Jace's respectability, his social standing, that she had overlooked his casual dismissal of her opinions, his need to control her every move. She had mistaken possession for affection. "This is outrageous," Jace sputtered. "Clara, we are leaving now." But Clara found herself rooted to the spot, unable to look away from Zane's dark eyes. In them, she saw everything she had been missing: passion, respect, genuine connection. She saw the boy who had risked everything to save a stranger's child, and the man who had carried that memory for 12 years. She saw her destiny terrifying and inevitable. "I need to go," she said finally, though every fiber of her being screamed in protest. "But thank you for then and for now." Zane nodded slowly, understanding more than she had said aloud. "Perhaps we will meet again, Clara." It wasn't a question. It was a promise. As Jace dragged her from the store, Clara looked back one last time. Zane stood in the shaft of sunlight from the doorway, watching her with an intensity that made her soul ache. And in that moment she knew with absolute certainty that her carefully planned life was about to come undone, because some forces were stronger than propriety, more powerful than social expectation, and more enduring than fear. Some forces, like the bond between two souls who had found each other against all odds, could not be denied. The schoolhouse smelled of chalk dust and pine soap, familiar scents that usually brought Clara comfort. But today, as she stood before her students, 12 children, ranging from 6 to 14 years old, she couldn't focus on the arithmetic lesson she was supposed to be teaching. Her mind kept drifting to the encounter at the general store, to the way Zane had looked at her with recognition and something deeper. Something that made her heart race even in memory. "Ms. Hayes." A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Little Lily, 7 years old with copper braids, was staring at her with concern. "Are you feeling poorly? You look flushed." Clara forced a smile and turned back to the chalkboard. "I'm quite well, Lily. Thank you. Now who can tell me what 7 times 8 equals?" The afternoon dragged on interminably. When she finally dismissed her students, Clara sank into her chair and pressed her cool hands to her burning cheeks. What was wrong with her? She was a respectable woman, an educated teacher, engaged to be married to a proper gentleman. She had no business thinking about an Apache warrior she barely knew, no matter how powerfully he affected her. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She felt as if she did know him, as if that moment 12 years ago had forged a connection that transcended time and circumstance. When their eyes met, she had felt recognized in a way that went beyond mere physical appearance, as if he saw into her very soul and understood everything she had never been able to put into words. Jace certainly didn't understand Clara. He loved the idea of her, the accomplished teacher from a respectable family, the perfect match for his orderly life. But he'd never asked about her dreams, her fears, or the parts of herself she'd kept hidden from the world. He saw only what he wanted to see and expected her to fit into the role he'd planned. A knock at the schoolhouse door made Clara jump. She quickly smoothed her skirt and called, "Come in." Ruth Gable entered, her face troubled. "Ms. Hayes, might I have a word?" "Of course." Clara gestured toward a chair, but Ruth remained standing, her hands clasped tightly before her. "I feel it's my duty to address what happened at Henderson's store this morning," Ruth said, her voice strained. "Your interaction with that Apache man has caused quite a stir in town." Clara straightened her spine, stiffening defensively. "I simply ensured that a customer was treated fairly, Mrs. Gable. Surely that's not controversial. In Boston, perhaps not, but here—" Ruth sighed heavily. "Ms. Hayes, you must understand the history of this territory. There have been conflicts, terrible violence on both sides. People here have lost loved ones, lost homes. The wounds are still fresh." "I understand that," Clara replied carefully, "but punishing every Apache person for the actions of some is neither just nor Christian. We cannot heal old wounds by inflicting new ones." Ruth's expression softened slightly. "You have a good heart, my dear, but you also have a reputation to maintain. You're a teacher, a role model for the children, and you're engaged to a respectable man who clearly has concerns about your judgment." Anger flared in Clara's chest. "My judgment, because I treated another human being with basic courtesy, Because I allowed myself to be drawn into an intimate conversation with an Apache man in full view of the entire town. People are talking, Clara. They're questioning whether you're suitable to teach their children. The injustice of it hit Clara like a physical blow. She had done nothing wrong yet. She was being condemned for failing to embrace the prejudices of her community. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. These same people who claimed to follow Christian principles of love and forgiveness were demanding that she treat Zane as less than human. "What would you have me do?" Clara asked quietly. "Keep your distance from the Apache people. Focus on your teaching and your upcoming marriage. In time, people will forget about this morning's incident," Ruth said with kind but firm eyes. "I'm saying this as a friend, Clara. This territory is not forgiving of those who step outside social bounds. For your own sake, please be more careful." After Ruth left, Clara sat in the empty schoolhouse, feeling the walls closing in around her. Her whole life she had tried to be what others wanted her to be: the grateful orphan, the dutiful daughter, the proper lady. She had buried her own desires so deep she had almost forgotten they existed. But seeing Zane again had awakened something in her that refused to be silenced. For the first time in 12 years, she felt truly alive, every nerve ending aware, every emotion heightened. The thought of suppressing that feeling and returning to the numb safety of her previous life was unbearable. That evening, Clara told Jace she needed to take a walk to clear her head. He disapproved. Proper young ladies didn't wander alone after dark. But Clara insisted, and eventually he retreated to his hotel with a disapproving frown. The moment she was free from his scrutiny, Clara felt her lungs expand fully for the first time all day. The desert night was cool and clear, the sky scattered with more stars than seemed possible. She walked to the edge of town, where civilization gave way to wild country, and stood breathing in the scent of sage and creosote. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Clara spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Zane stood in the shadows of a cottonwood tree, so still she hadn't noticed him. In the moonlight, he looked otherworldly, like something from a dream. "How did you—" She trailed off, realizing how foolish the question was. Of course he had moved silently through the desert. This was his land, had been long before white settlers arrived to claim it as their own. "I wanted to see you," he said, simply stepping into the moonlight. "I should not have come, but I could not stay away." Clara's breath caught. The raw honesty in his voice stripped away all her defenses. "I'm glad you did." They stood facing each other, an arm's length apart, close enough that Clara could see the rise and fall of his chest, could count the individual strands of his long hair. Close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body in the cool night air. "This morning at the store," Zane said slowly, "you defended me. Why? Because it was right." Clara met his eyes. "And because I owe you. You saved my life once. The least I could do was ensure you were treated fairly." "You owe me nothing." Zane's voice was rough with emotion. "I did what any decent person would do when they find a child in need. But you—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You have lived in my memory for 12 years. The little girl with golden hair and eyes like the sky. I wondered what became of you. If you survived, if you found happiness." "Did you," Clara whispered, "find happiness?" Zane's expression turned sorrowful. "I found survival. But happiness?" He shook his head. "That is a luxury the conquered do not often know." The pain in his voice struck Clara to her core. She stepped closer, drawn by an overwhelming need to comfort him. "Tell me, please. I want to understand." For a long moment, Zane said nothing. Then slowly he began to speak. "The day I found you, I was returning from a raid. Not for violence, for survival. My people were being pushed onto smaller and smaller lands. Our food sources are depleted. We took what we needed to survive, and the soldiers called us savages for it." His jaw tightened. "I was 18 years old, And already I had lost my father to a cavalry raid, my younger brother to a disease brought by white settlers. My mother wept every night for her lost sons. When I heard your cries, my first thought was to ride past. You were the enemy's child. Why should I risk exposure to save you? He looked at Clara with raw honesty. But then I saw your face. You were so small, so terrified. And I remembered my brother at that age, full of life and laughter before sickness took him. I thought, this child is not responsible for the sins of her people, any more than my brother was responsible for mine. Clara felt tears streaming down her cheeks. You risked everything for me. I carried you for miles, fearing every moment that soldiers would find us and shoot me on sight. You clung to me like you knew I was your only chance. Zane's voice softened. I spoke to you in my language, told you that you would be safe, that I would not let harm come to you. You could not understand the words, but you stopped crying. You trusted me. I still do, Clara said without thinking. I've never forgotten you, never stopped thinking about that day, wondering who you were, if I would ever see you again. The air between them grew thick with unspoken emotion. Zane raised one hand slowly, giving Clara time to step back if she wished. When she didn't move, he touched her face with infinite gentleness. His calloused fingers traced the line of her cheekbone. The frightened child became a brave woman, he murmured. A woman who stands up for strangers in a hostile town. A woman who walks alone under the stars without fear. I should be afraid, Clara whispered, though she felt no fear at all. Everyone says I should stay away from you, that it's dangerous, improper. They are right to warn you. Zane's thumb brushed across her lower lip, sending a shiver down her spine. Being near me will bring you trouble. Your fiancé already looks at me with murder in his eyes. The townspeople will shun you. You could lose everything. Then why are you here? Clara's voice was barely audible. Because I am selfish. Zane's eyes burned with intensity. Because 12 years ago, I held you in my arms and felt something shift in my soul. And today, when I saw you again, grown and beautiful and fierce, that feeling returned 1,000 times stronger. Because I know I should walk away, should let you have your safe, respectable life. But I cannot. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. I don't want safe and respectable, I want... What do you want, Clara? The way he said her name, like a caress, like a prayer, broke something inside her. All the walls she had carefully constructed, all the rules she had tried to follow, all the expectations she had struggled to meet, crumbled to dust. You, she breathed. I want you. Zane's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked as stunned as she felt by her own boldness. Then his hand slid into her hair, pulling her close with a groan that sounded like surrender. Clara, he whispered against her temple. We cannot. You are promised to another. This is impossible, I know. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat thunder beneath her ear. But I don't care. Tell me I'm not mad. Tell me you feel this too. This connection. This certainty that we were meant to find each other again. You are not mad. Zane's arms tightened around her. I feel it. From the moment I saw you in that town square, I felt nothing else. It's like... He paused, searching for words. Like recognizing a part of myself I did not know was missing. They stood there, locked in that embrace for what felt like an eternity, neither willing to be the first to let go. Clara had never felt so complete, so utterly at peace, despite the chaos swirling around them. In Zane's arms, she felt a sense of belonging that she had never known anywhere else. Finally, with great reluctance, Zane eased her back just enough to look into her eyes. What will you do about your fiancé? The question hung heavily in the air. Clara thought of Jace waiting for her in town, planning a future she no longer desired. She thought of the scandal that would erupt if she broke their engagement. She thought of everything. She stood to lose her reputation, her place in society, maybe even her freedom if Jace decided to make trouble. And she thought of living the rest of her life without ever feeling this way again. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know I can't marry him. Not now. Not after this." Zane cupped her face gently, his expression torn between joy and anguish. "You would give up everything for a man your people call savage, for a future filled with hardship and prejudice." "I would give up anything," Clara said fiercely, "for the chance to be with the man who saved my life. The man who has lived in my heart for 12 years. The man who makes me feel alive for the first time in my entire life." "Then you are braver than I thought." Zane leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But when she didn't move, he kissed her. His lips brushed against hers at first, gentle and almost reverent, as if both of them were afraid of breaking the fragile moment. But as Clara's arms wound around his neck and she pressed closer, the gentleness gave way to something more desperate, more consuming. This was 12 years of longing, of searching, of incomplete dreams, finally finding resolution. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zane rested his forehead against hers. "This will not be easy, Clara. The path we choose will be difficult. I know." She smiled through her tears. "But I'd rather face hardship with you than comfort with anyone else." "Then we will face it together." Zane's arms tightened around her one last time before he reluctantly stepped back. "But you must be careful. Jace is not a man who accepts loss easily. I see it in his eyes. He views you as a possession, not a partner. When you tell him the truth, he will not let you go peacefully." Nana Clara felt a chill run down her spine, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I'm not afraid of Jace." "Then be afraid for my sake." Zane's expression turned deadly serious. "Because if he tries to hurt you, I will kill him, and then I will be hunted like an animal, and you will lose me forever." The raw honesty of his words, the violence he was capable of, the protection he offered so freely, should have frightened Clara. Instead, she felt only gratitude that someone finally cared enough to defend her. "No one will hurt me," she promised, "and no one will take you from me. We'll find a way to make it work." Zane nodded slowly, though doubt shadowed his eyes. "Go back to town before you're missed. But tomorrow night, meet me here again. There's something I want to show you." "I'll be here," Clara promised. "I'll always be here." And as she walked back toward town, her lips still tingling from his kiss, and her heart soaring with dangerous hope, Clara knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had tasted freedom, felt passion, discovered what it meant to be truly seen and valued, and she would fight with everything in her to keep it. The morning brought harsh reality crashing back. Clara woke to find Jace pounding on her door, his face red with fury, and what looked suspiciously like dried tears. "Where were you last night?" he demanded the moment she opened the door. "I went to check on you, and you were gone. Gone. For over 2 hours." Clara wrapped her robe more tightly around herself, acutely aware that she wore only her nightgown beneath it. "I told you. I was taking a walk. I needed time to think." "For 2 hours. In the dark." Jace pushed past her into the small room, his movements agitated. "Do you have any idea how worried I was, how improper it was for you to wander around unsupervised? I'm a grown woman, Jace," Clara said, her voice steady. "I don't require supervision. You're my fiancé." He whirled to face her, and for the first time Clara saw something ugly beneath his polished exterior. "You represent me, Clara. Your behavior reflects on my reputation. And what I saw yesterday at that store, you speaking to that savage like he was your equal, defending him to the shopkeeper. It was humiliating. Humiliating for you." Clara felt her own anger rise. "Or humiliating that I treated another person with basic human decency. They're not people like us." Jace's voice rose dangerously. They're heathens, Clara. Violent, primitive heathens who murdered innocent settlers by the hundreds. How can you possibly defend them? I'm not defending violence, Clara said carefully. I'm defending one man who showed me kindness when he had no reason to. One man who saved my life at great risk to his own. Jace's eyes narrowed. So it's true the gossip I heard this morning, that you have some sort of history with that Apache, that he's the one who supposedly rescued you as a child. It's not supposedly. He did rescue me. I would have died in the desert if not for Zane. So, Jace spat the name like a curse. You know his name? How intimate. Tell me, Clara. Jace's voice was cold. Did you meet with him last night? Is that where you were during your walk? Clara's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to meet Jace's gaze steadily. This was the choice she had to make. She could lie, salvage her engagement, and return to the safety of the life she had known. But she would lose Zane. She would lose herself. Yes, she said quietly. I saw him last night. We talked. The slap came so fast, she didn't have time to react. Pain exploded across her cheek, and she stumbled backward, her hand flying to her face in shock. Jace looked as stunned as she felt. His hand was still raised, trembling, his face white with horror at what he'd done. Clara, I didn't mean... You made me. Get out. Clara's voice was dead calm, though her entire body shook with rage and shock. Get out now! Clara, please, I lost my temper, but you have to understand. I understand perfectly. She straightened to her full height, ignoring the throbbing in her cheek. I understand that you believe you own me, that my thoughts, my feelings, my very movements are subject to your approval. That you think you have the right to strike me when I displease you. It was one moment of weakness. It was the truth of who you are. Clara moved to the door and held it open. The engagement is over, Jace. I will not marry you. I will not spend my life walking on eggshells, afraid of your temper, pretending to be someone I'm not, just to keep you happy. Jace's expression cycled through shock, hurt, and finally settled on cold fury. You're throwing away our future for what? Some fantasy about a savage who will never be accepted by decent society. You'll be ruined, Clara. No respectable man will have you. Then I'll live without a respectable man. Clara lifted her chin. I'd rather be alone than with someone who sees me as property. You won't be alone, will you? Jace's eyes glittered with malice. You'll be with him, that Apache. Tell me, have you already let him touch you? Have you spread your legs for him enough? The roar came from the doorway where Zane suddenly appeared, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Leave now, before I forget that I don't kill unarmed men. Jace blanched, taking a step back, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat without a parting shot. This isn't over. I'll see you both ruined for this. I'll tell everyone what you are, a whore who spreads her legs for savages. Zane moved with lightning speed, pinning Jace against the wall with one hand around his throat. Say one more word. Zane growled, his voice deadly quiet. And I'll rip out your tongue and feed it to the coyotes. Clara is a lady of courage and honor worth 1,000 of you. Now get out of my sight before I lose control. He released Jace, who stumbled toward the door, gasping and rubbing his throat. At the threshold, Jace turned back, his expression twisted with hatred. You'll regret this, both of you. I'll make sure of it. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. In the sudden silence, Clara became aware that she was trembling violently. Zane turned to her, his anger instantly shifting to concern. Let me see. She allowed him to gently tilt her face. His fingers were feather-light as they examined the red mark on her cheek. His jaw clenched, and she saw murder in his eyes. He struck you, Zane said flatly. I should have killed him. No. Clara caught his hand, pressing it against her uninjured cheek. You did the right thing. Killing him would only give them an excuse to hunt you. We can't let him win that way. Zane's voice cracked with anguish. He hurt you. I swore to myself I would protect you, and I failed. You didn't fail. You were here. Clara managed a shaky smile. How did you know to come? I was watching. I've been since dawn worried about your safety. He looked almost embarrassed. I know it's not proper, but I couldn't stay away knowing that man was nearby. Relief flooded through Clara, followed by warmth. I'm glad you were here. But Zane, he meant what he said. He'll try to ruin both of us. He has connections back east influence. He could make life very difficult. Let him try. Zane's arms came around Clara, pulling her close. I do not care what lies he spreads or what threats he makes. Nothing will keep me from you. Clara pressed her face against Zane's chest, breathing in his scent, letting the strength of his embrace steady her. The town will turn against me now. Ruth Gable will likely dismiss me from my teaching position. People will talk. Then we'll leave. Zane's response was immediate, as if he had already made up his mind. I have family in the mountains, away from white settlements. We can go there. Start fresh. Leave. Clara pulled back slightly to look at him. But this is your home. My home is wherever you are. Zane cupped her face gently, careful of the bruise on her cheek. Clara, I've lived 30 years without knowing real happiness. 12 years ago I held a frightened child, and my heart opened in a way I didn't understand. Yesterday I saw that child grown into a woman of courage and beauty, and I understood. You were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. I will not let prejudice, fear, or convention keep us apart. Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks. I love you, she whispered. I don't know when it happened. Maybe 12 years ago, maybe yesterday, maybe in every moment in between, but I love you with everything I am. And I love you. Zane kissed her forehead and her temple, her lips with aching tenderness. My Clara, my brave, beautiful Clara. A sharp knock at the door made them both freeze. Ruth Gable's voice called out, Miss Hayes, are you in there? I need to speak with you immediately. Clara and Zane exchanged glances. She'll have heard about the broken engagement, Clara murmured. Probably about your presence here this morning, too. News travels fast in a small town. Do you want me to leave? Zane asked. Clara considered for a moment, then shook her head. No. I'm done hiding, done pretending. If she's here to dismiss me, she should know exactly why I broke my engagement and why I don't regret it. Clara opened the door to find Ruth looking distressed. The older woman's normally composed features were tight with worry. Behind her stood several other women from town, their expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. Miss Hayes! Ruth's eyes flickered to Zane, then back to Clara. Mr. Carter came to me this morning with some very disturbing accusations. He claims you've been carrying on an inappropriate relationship with him. She gestured toward Zane without looking at him. He showed me bruises on his neck and claimed he was attacked while trying to protect you from unwanted advances. Clara felt fury surge through her, her voice a low growl. That's a lie. Jace struck me when I told him our engagement was over. Zane intervened to prevent further violence. Ruth's eyes widened as she took in the red mark on Clara's cheek. For a moment, doubt flickered across her face, but then one of the other women spoke up. She's lying to protect her Indian lover. Mrs. Steele, the banker's wife, practically spat the words. We all know what she is now, a woman of loose morals who prefers savages to decent Christian men. Clara's anger flared, but before she could respond, Zane spoke, his voice quiet, but filled with menace. I suggest you watch your tongue. Mrs. Steele took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. Clara is worth more than all of you combined, Zane continued. She has shown more courage and compassion in one day than you have in your entire lives. How dare you speak to us? Another woman gasped. Someone fetch the sheriff, Ruth ordered, her voice trembling. That won't be necessary. Sheriff Jed Wells pushed through the crowd, his weathered face weary. He looked at Clara with something like pity. Miss Hayes, I'm going to have to ask you to leave town for your own safety as much as anything else. Feelings are running high, and I can't guarantee I'll be able to protect you from mob justice. Mob justice? Clara stared at him in disbelief. For what crime? For ending an engagement with a man who struck me, for consorting with an Apache. The sheriff's tone was matter-of-fact. Right or wrong, that's how people see it. And Mr. Carter has filed a complaint claiming assault. He's demanding that your friend here be arrested. On what grounds? Zane's voice was ice. For defending a woman from violence. For being Apache in a town that doesn't want you here. The sheriff met Zane's eyes directly. I'm being straight with you because I respect that you saved Miss Hayes as a child. But you need to leave, both of you, today, before this turns uglier than it already has. Clara felt Zane's hand find hers, their fingers interlacing. She looked around at the gathered crowd, people she had hoped to serve, to teach, to help. Instead, they stared at her with judgment and disgust, as if she had committed some unforgivable sin. Only Ruth's expression held any sympathy. I'm sorry, Clara, Ruth said quietly. I wish things could be different. You would have made an excellent teacher. I'm sorry too, Clara replied. Sorry that this town chooses hatred over humanity. She turned to Zane, and in his eyes she saw the strength and certainty that steadied her own resolve. Take me home, she said simply. Take me to your family. Zane's expression transformed with joy and relief. Are you certain there's no going back from this choice? I've never been more certain of anything. Clara squeezed his hand. The only thing I regret is not making it sooner. They packed Clara's few belongings in tense silence, while the crowd dispersed, muttering among themselves. The sheriff remained, ostensibly to keep the peace, but Clara suspected he was simply ensuring they actually left. As they prepared to depart, a small figure darted through the crowd. Little Lily, her eyes red from crying, ran up to Clara. Miss Hayes, don't go. You're the best teacher we ever had. Clara knelt down, ignoring the disapproving gasps from the remaining townsfolk. Emma, sweetheart, I have to go, but I want you to remember something. Always stand up for what's right, even when everyone else says you're wrong. And never let anyone make you feel ashamed for showing kindness. Emma threw her arms around Clara's neck. I'll remember, I promise. As Clara stood, she caught Ruth's eye one last time. The older woman's expression was troubled, and Clara thought she saw regret there. Perhaps someday Silver Creek would change. Perhaps someday people like Ruth would find the courage to challenge the prejudices that poisoned their community. But that day wasn't today, and Clara was done waiting for the world to be ready for her love. Zane helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. As they rode out of town, Clara didn't look back. She kept her eyes fixed on the mountains ahead, where a new life waited, uncertain, perhaps difficult but real, in a way her old existence had never been. No regrets, Zane murmured against her ear. Clara leaned back into his warmth, feeling his heartbeat steady against her spine. Not a single one. They rode for hours through increasingly rugged terrain, leaving behind the scattered settlements of white civilization and entering land that seemed untouched by time. The desert gave way to rocky hills dotted with pine and juniper, the air growing cooler and sweeter as they climbed. Clara had never seen a landscape so beautiful or so unforgiving. Zane rode with confidence, guiding his horse along paths that were invisible to Clara's untrained eyes. Occasionally he would point out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a hidden spring, an eagle's nest, sharing his knowledge of this land that was his home. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, they crested a rise, and Clara caught her breath. Below them, nestled in a valley protected by steep canyon walls, was a small Apache settlement. Perhaps 20 Wickiups, traditional dwellings, made of brush and hide, were scattered among cottonwood trees near a clear stream. Smoke rose from several cooking fires, and Clara could hear children laughing voices calling to one another in the Apache language. "Your family?" she asked. "What remains of them?" Zane's voice carried old grief. "Once we numbered in the hundreds." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As they descended into the valley, people began to emerge from the Wickiups, watching their approach with curiosity and weariness. Clara saw women with infants on their hips, elders with weathered faces, young men who studied Zane and his passenger with interest. A woman of perhaps 50 stepped forward as Zane dismounted. Her face was lined but beautiful, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her tone questioning, and Zane responded in the same language. Clara caught one word that sounded like mother, and realized this must be Zane's mother, the woman who had wept for her lost sons, who had survived so much loss and hardship. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Zane's mother's expression shifting from surprise to disbelief to something that might have been understanding. Finally, she turned her attention to Clara, studying her with an intensity that made Clara want to fidget. But she held herself still, meeting the older woman's gaze with as much respect and courage as she could muster. Zane's mother spoke again, her words softer now. Zane helped Clara dismount, then took her hand and led her forward. "Agnes," Zane said, "this is my mother, Lark. Mother, this is Clara, the child I saved 12 years ago, now the woman I love." Lark's eyes widened and she looked between them with dawning comprehension. She reached out slowly and touched Clara's face, her fingers gentle on the fading bruise. She said something in Apache that sounded like a question. "She asks who hurt you," Zane translated, "and if that person still breathes." Clara felt a rush of warmth toward this fierce woman. "My former fiancé struck me when I ended our engagement, but Zane stopped him. No one will hurt me again." Zane translated and Lark nodded approvingly. She spoke again, longer this time, and Zane's expression softened. "She says that any woman brave enough to choose love over safety, to choose her son over her own people's approval, is worthy of respect. She welcomes you to our family." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes. "Tell her thank you. Tell her I know I have much to learn about your ways, but I'm willing to try. I want to be worthy of her son." Zane's mother, Lark, seemed to understand even before he translated. She pulled Clara into an embrace, the scent of smoked sage and something sweetly unfamiliar filling the air. When she released Clara, Lark was smiling, a beautiful smile that transformed her entire face. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and broken communication. Lark's extended family welcomed Clara with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some were openly friendly, others more cautious, all curious about the white woman who had appeared with one of their own. An elderly man named Hawk, who Zane introduced as his uncle, spoke some English. Over a meal of roasted meat, corn, and a type of bread Clara had never tasted before, Hawk explained the challenges facing their small community. "We live here in peace," he said, his voice gravelly with age. "We hunt. We plant small gardens. We trade with the few white men who will deal fairly with us. But it becomes harder every year. The soldiers push us to move to reservations where we would be dependent on government rations that never come. Many of our young people have already gone, believing it is the only way to survive." "Why haven't you gone?" Clara asked. Hawk's eyes flashed with pride. "Because this is our land. Our ancestors are buried here. Our stories are written in these mountains. To leave would be to abandon not just our home, but our very identity." Clara understood that sentiment more deeply than he could know. Hadn't she just made a similar choice to be true to herself, to claim her own identity regardless of the cost? As darkness fell, Zane led Clara to a small Wickiup set, slightly apart from the others. My home, he said simply. It's not much. It's perfect. Clara stepped inside and looked around the small space. A fire pit dominated the center with sleeping furs arranged along one side. Woven baskets held supplies and traditional weapons hung from the wooden frame. It was simple, utilitarian, and somehow felt more honest than any of the elaborately furnished rooms she had occupied in Boston. Zane built a fire while Clara arranged her few belongings. When he finished, he sat back and watched her, his expression making her pulse quicken. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That I can't believe you're here. That I keep expecting to wake up and find this was a dream." He reached out and pulled her down beside him. "Clara, are you certain this is what you want? Life here is hard. We have little comfort, little security. You are giving up so much." She silenced him with a kiss. "I'm giving up nothing that matters, and I'm gaining everything I've ever wanted." "What have you wanted?" His voice was rough with emotion. "You." Clara's words came out with a deep sincerity. "This. A life that's real, not performed for others' approval. I've spent my life trying to be what others expected: the grateful orphan, the dutiful daughter, the proper lady. I was so busy being what I should be that I forgot to discover who I really am. But with you, I can just be Clara, flawed, imperfect, but real." Zane pulled her fully into his arms, and they sat by the fire holding each other as the night deepened around them. Clara felt peace settle over her, a deep, bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. "Tell me about the words," she said after a while. "The words you said when you rescued me. I never forgot them, but I never knew what they meant." Zane was quiet for a moment. "Don't be afraid, little one," he finally said, his voice tender. "You are safe now. I will not let the darkness take you." Fresh tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "I wasn't afraid. Not once I heard your voice. Somehow I knew you would keep me safe. And I will," Zane promised, his voice low and firm. "For the rest of my life I will keep you safe." They made love slowly that night, learning each other's bodies, with reverence and wonder. There was no rush, no urgency, just the slow building of pleasure and connection. The joy of two souls finally finding their home in each other. Afterward, wrapped in Zane's arms beneath warm furs, Clara watched the firelight dance across the ceiling of the wickiup, feeling more content than she'd ever been in her life. "What happens now?" she asked drowsily. "Will Jace really try to cause trouble?" "Perhaps," Zane said, his voice thoughtful. "But he has no power here." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And even if he brings soldiers, we can disappear into the mountains. My people have been evading the cavalry for generations. We know every canyon, every hidden trail." Clara snuggled closer, feeling his heart beating steadily beneath her ear. "I want to help. I can teach not just children, but adults too. Reading, writing, arithmetic. Knowledge is power, and your people deserve every advantage." Zane's arms tightened around her, his hold protective and reassuring. "We'll build something together, Clara. Something real." "You would do that. Teach my people." "They're my people now, too," Clara said simply. "And yes, I would love to teach them if they'll have me." "They will have you." Zane's voice was thick with emotion. "You cannot know what this means, Clara. Education has been denied to us, withheld as another form of control. For you to offer to share your knowledge freely, it is a gift beyond measure." They talked deep into the night, making plans for the future. Clara would start teaching basic English and mathematics to anyone interested, while Zane would help her learn the Apache language and customs. Together, they would bridge the gap between their two worlds, creating something new and beautiful from the ruins of the old. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both foreign and deeply satisfying. Clara woke each morning to the sound of the stream and the smell of pine smoke. She learned to grind corn, identify edible plants, and even tan hides. Her hands, once soft and useless, grew calloused and capable. Lark took her under her wing, teaching her with patience and the occasional exasperated humor when Clara made mistakes. The language barrier was frustrating at first, but Clara learned quickly, motivated by necessity and a genuine affection for Zane's mother. The women of the camp were initially wary, but Clara's willingness to learn and her obvious love for Zane gradually won them over. When she successfully tanned her first hide, albeit imperfectly, the women celebrated with her, as if she had accomplished something momentous. In the evenings, Clara began her informal school. She started with just 3 students, 2 children, and 1 curious elder. But within a week, a dozen people were gathering to learn. Zane acted as translator when needed, though Clara made it a point to teach in simple English, knowing that language skills would be crucial for survival in an increasingly white-dominated world. She also learned from them. Hawk told stories of Apache history, of battles, heroes, and tragedies. The women taught her traditional songs. The children showed her how to move silently through the forest, how to read animal tracks, how to find water in seemingly barren land. Clara had never felt more alive. Every day brought new challenges, new discoveries, new reasons to be grateful for the choice she had made. But peace, as she was learning, was always temporary on the frontier. 3 weeks after their arrival, Zane returned from a hunting trip with news that made Clara's blood run cold. Jace has returned. He came to Tucson with federal marshals and soldiers telling them that you were kidnapped by a violent Apache warrior. They're searching for us. Clara felt ice flood her veins. But that's absurd. I chose to come here. I wasn't kidnapped. Truth doesn't matter when prejudice is involved. Hawk's weathered face was grim. They will use this as an excuse to attack us, to drive us from our land. It's what they've always wanted. We should move deeper into the mountains, one of the younger men suggested. Disappear before they find us. No. Clara stood, her mind racing. If we run, it confirms their story. We need to go to them. Let me speak to the authorities. Tell them the truth. Zane gripped her shoulders. You cannot trust them to listen, and I will not risk you falling back into Jace's hands. He can't force me to return with him. I'm a grown woman who made her own choice. Clara met Zane's eyes steadily. I won't let Jace's lies destroy your home. Let me try to make this right. Hawk's voice was soft but firm. She has courage, nephew, and perhaps she is right. If she willingly returns and testifies that she came here of her own free will, it removes their justification for violence. Zane's expression was torn between logic and fear. If they hurt you, they won't. Clara took his face in her hands. I'll go to Tucson, speak to the marshals, and make the truth clear. You stay here with your family. If it goes wrong, if Jace somehow manages to manipulate the situation, then you run. Get everyone to safety. I'm coming with you. Zane's tone brooked no argument. I will not let you face them alone. They argued, but Clara knew from Zane's expression that she wouldn't win this battle. Finally, she conceded. Fine. But you stay out of sight until I've had a chance to speak with the authorities. Agreed. Agreed. Zane pulled her into a fierce embrace. But if they try to harm you, I'm ending this conversation with bullets. They left at dawn, riding hard for Tucson. Clara's mind churned with possibilities, trying to anticipate every argument Jace might have made, every lie he might have told. She had to be convincing, had to make the authorities understand that she was there by choice, and that Zane was not the villain of this story. As they approached the town, Zane guided them to a ridge overlooking the main street. From their vantage point, Clara and Zane saw the increased military presence, at least 24 soldiers, far more than the usual garrison. Zane muttered under his breath, "This is worse than I thought. They're preparing for a campaign." Clara felt a wave of dread settle in her stomach, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'll go down alone. You wait here and keep watch." If you don't return by sunset, Zane growled, I'm coming to get you. He kissed her hard, and his words were sharp with intent. And heaven help anyone who stands in my way. Clara's heart pounded as she made her way into town alone. Her feet seemed to move of their own accord, each step heavier than the last. She went straight to the marshal's office, finding Jace speaking with two stern-looking men in federal uniforms. Jace's face went white the moment he saw her. Clara, thank heavens you're safe. His voice was strained with relief. I've been frantic with worry. Stop lying. Clara snapped, her voice ringing clear and strong as she stepped forward. I'm here to tell you, Marshal, that I was not kidnapped. I left Silver Creek willingly, with Zane, an Apache man who saved my life as a child. I broke my engagement to Mr. Carter because he struck me in anger. Everything he's told you is a fabrication designed to justify violence against innocent people. The Marshal exchanged glances with his younger companion. The older man, a grizzled figure with steel-gray hair, studied Clara with sharp eyes. Miss Hayes, is it? Yes, sir. You're saying you went with this Apache willingly, that you're residing in his camp of your own free will. That's exactly what I'm saying. Clara lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. I love him. I choose to be with him. And I will not allow Mr. Carter's wounded pride to result in violence against peaceful people. Clara's words hit Jace like a slap. He sputtered in protest. She's been brainwashed. Anyone can see she's not in her right mind. That savage has clearly... I suggest you stop speaking, Clara said coldly, stepping closer to the Marshal. Before I tell these gentlemen about the bruise you left on my face when I refused to obey you. Jace's face flushed with rage. You little... Mr. Carter, that's enough. The Marshal's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Miss Hayes, you seem quite clear-headed to me, but I need to ask... The Marshal continued, his tone more contemplative now. Are you aware that by consorting with Apache people, you're making yourself an outcast from civilized society? That you'll be unable to return to your former life? I have no desire to return to my former life, Clara replied firmly. I've found where I belong, Marshal, with people who value courage, honor, and compassion over social standing and prejudice. The Marshal was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words. Finally, he nodded slowly. Then it seems Mr. Carter's claims of kidnapping are unfounded. Miss Hayes is clearly acting of her own volition. Jace exploded. This is outrageous. She's throwing her life away for a savage. Someone needs to protect her from her own poor judgment. Miss Hayes is an adult, the Marshal said, his tone growing tired. She's made her choice, and it's not our place to override it. As for you, Mr. Carter, the Marshal added with finality, I suggest you return to Boston. You've wasted enough of the federal government's time and resources with your false accusations. Jace's desperation grew as he looked between them. You're just going to let her go back to that Apache camp. Let her live like an animal. I'm going to respect her right to make her own choices. The Marshal replied, his voice even. Something you might want to learn how to do. Now get out of my office, both of you. And Mr. Carter, if you make any more trouble, I'll have you arrested for filing false reports. Clara felt weak with relief as she left the Marshal's office. But as she stepped into the street, Jace followed, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, Clara, he hissed. You think you can humiliate me like this? And just walk away? I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone back east what you really are, a whore who prefers savages to decent men. Tell whoever you want, Clara said wearily, not bothering to look back. I don't care what Boston society thinks of me anymore. I never did, really. I only cared what you thought, and that was my mistake. She turned to walk away, but Jace grabbed her arm roughly. You belong to me. You promised yourself to me. Let her go. Zane's voice was quiet but deadly as he materialized from the alley beside them, a rifle casually held in his hands. Jace flinched, releasing Clara as if burned. He stumbled backward, fear creeping into his eyes. I'll have you arrested for threatening me. I haven't threatened you yet. Zane said, his gaze fixed firmly on Jace's face. But if you ever touch Clara again, if you ever come near our home, if you ever so much as speak her name again, I will find you. And I will make you regret being born. That's not a threat, that's a promise. The cold certainty in Zane's voice made even Clara shiver. Jace opened his mouth to argue, but then he closed it again, his expression twisted with hatred. He turned on his heel and practically ran back toward the marshal's office. I thought we agreed you'd stay out of sight, Clara said, but she was smiling. I saw him grab you, Zane replied with a small shrug, his arm wrapping around her waist. All agreements became void at that moment. They left Tucson together, riding back toward the mountains and home. As the town faded into the distance, Clara felt the last threads connecting her to her old life finally snap. There would be no turning back now. Jace would spread his poison, tell anyone who would listen, that she had fallen from grace. But Clara didn't care. She had something far more valuable than society's approval. She had love real, raw, and transformative. She had purpose. She had a family who accepted her not for who she pretended to be, but for who she truly was. She had Zane. No regrets, he asked as they rode side by side. Clara leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. Not a single one. 5 years had passed since the day Clara chose love over propriety, and every one of those years had been richer and fuller than all her previous life combined. The world hadn't stopped turning just because a white woman decided to live among Apache people. The soldiers hadn't come to destroy their small settlement, and slowly, even some of the white settlers in the area had learned to treat them with a grudging respect, if not full acceptance. Clara stood outside the wickiup she shared with Zane, watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In her arms, their daughter, 3-year-old Nadie, whose name meant Wise One, drowsed peacefully, her dark hair curling against Clara's chest. At her feet, their son, 18-month-old Thomas, named, simply because Clara liked the sound of it, played in the dirt, his tiny hands gathering a collection of interesting rocks. The school she had started in that first month had grown beyond her wildest expectations. Nearly 40 students now attended her classes, ranging from children learning their letters to elders determined to master English. Several of her students had gone on to become advocates for their people, using their language skills to negotiate more fairly with government officials and traders. Zane had become a leader in their community, respected for his wisdom and his willingness to embrace change where it made sense while fiercely protecting traditional ways. Together they had found a path that honored both of their worlds, creating something new and beautiful in the process. You're up early, Zane said, his arms coming around her from behind, careful not to disturb their sleeping daughter. Couldn't sleep, Clara murmured. Just thinking, she added, turning slightly in his arms, about how different my life could have been. If I'd married Jace, if I'd stayed in Boston, if you hadn't found me that day when I was 8 years old. Do you ever wonder what that life would have been like? Sometimes, Zane replied, his voice soft, but only for a moment. He kissed her gently, then grinned. Because then I remember this. You, our children, our home, our purpose. And I know I made the right choice. Clara laughed softly. Especially when Thomas decides to eat dirt, or when Nadie insists on staying up until midnight listening to Hawk's stories. That's true, Zane smirked. Besides, you're the one who encourages her. I've heard you sneaking her extra time with your uncle, Clara teased. Zane shrugged. She needs to know her heritage. His eyes sparkled with amusement. Both of her heritages. Clara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Nadie and Thomas were living bridges between two worlds, speaking both English and Apache, fluently comfortable in buckskin or cotton dresses. equally at home roasting meat over an open fire or eating at a table with utensils. The sound of hoofbeats broke the quiet and both of them turned. A rider was approaching, not unusual as their settlement had become something of a way station for travelers who preferred to trade fairly rather than cheat. But as the rider drew closer, Clara's heart skipped a beat. It was Ruth Gable. The older woman dismounted slowly, her gaze sweeping over the camp with obvious discomfort, but also curiosity. When she spotted Clara, her expression shifted to something complicated. Regret, relief, shame. "Ruth," Clara said, stepping forward. Ruth smiled faintly, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I've been trying to work up the courage to come here for 5 years, Clara, to apologize, to tell you that what I did was wrong." Clara blinked in surprise, her voice catching in her throat. Thank you. That means more than you might think." "Silver Creek has changed since you left," Ruth said softly, her eyes distant. "Or perhaps I should say, I've changed. I've had 5 teachers since you, and none of them had a tenth of your dedication or skill," Ruth continued. "The children still talk about you. They still remember the teacher who stood up for what was right even when everyone else said she was wrong." "I only did what anyone should do," Clara said quietly. "I treated people with basic human decency." "You did far more than that." Ruth looked at Zane, then at the children and back at Clara. "You chose love over fear. You chose truth over comfort, and you've built something beautiful here. I can see it in your face, in the way your husband looks at you, in your children's eyes." Ruth reached into her bag and pulled out a letter. "I brought you this. It's from little Lily Crawford." She smiled faintly. "Well, not so little anymore. She's 14 now, and she's become quite the advocate for fair treatment of Apache people." Ruth Gable said, her voice thick with emotion. "She wanted me to tell you that you inspired her to be brave, to stand up for what's right. She's applying to Teachers College, hopes to follow in your footsteps." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes as she took the letter. "Emma. I've thought about her so often. Wondered how she was doing. She's doing well. Thanks in large part to you." Ruth managed a smile, but it was tinged with sadness. "I won't keep you. I know I'm not exactly welcome here, but I wanted you to know that your example mattered, Clara. It changed people. Changed me." After Ruth left, Clara stood holding Emma's letter, trying not to cry. Zane came to her side, their children in his arms. "Good news?" he asked gently. "The best news." Clara wiped her eyes. "Evidence that love and courage can change the world, even if only one heart at a time." That evening, as the sun set and the camp settled into peaceful routines, Clara sat by the fire with her family. Nadie had finally fallen asleep, curled up on Zane's lap, while Thomas had claimed Clara's knee as his throne. In the distance, she could hear the students from her afternoon class singing a mix of English and Apache lyrics that represented everything they were trying to build. "Tell me again, Mama," Nadie murmured drowsily, "how you and Daddy met." Clara exchanged glances with Zane and smiled. This was Nadie's favorite story, one she never tired of hearing. Once upon a time there was a little girl in the desert. He saved her life even though he had no reason to trust her people, even though it put him in danger. He carried her to safety and then disappeared into the night. The little girl never forgot him. For 12 years she carried his memory in her heart, and when she grew up, became a woman, she found him again. This time she saved him too, not from danger, but from loneliness, from a life without love. And they lived happily ever after. Nadie finished contentedly, her eyes fluttering shut. "Yes, sweetheart, they lived happily ever after. But it wasn't the end." Clara thought as she looked around at her family, her community, her life. It was the beginning of understanding, of unity, of a future where children like Nadie and Thomas could live without having to choose between their dual heritages, where love could cross boundaries that prejudice had drawn. The path hadn't been easy. There had been hardship, struggle, moments of doubt and fear. But every trial had only strengthened the bond between Clara and Zane. Every challenge had deepened their commitment to each other and to the life they were building. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Clara leaned her head against Zane's shoulder and felt profound gratitude wash over her. She had been given 2 chances at life, once when a young warrior saved a frightened child, and again when a grown woman had been brave enough to choose love over fear. And she had made the most of both chances. "Thank you," she whispered to Zane. "For what? For saving me, for loving me, for giving me a life worth living." Zane's arm tightened around her. "I should be thanking you. You gave me back my heart, you gave me hope, you gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low, their children sleeping peacefully in their arms. In the distance, coyotes sang their evening song, and the wind whispered through the pine trees. The desert night was cool and clear, full of stars and promise, and Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. In Zane's arms, surrounded by their children, home at last, in a love that had survived 12 years of separation and would endure for all the years to come. The child he saved had become the woman he couldn't forget, and the warrior who had shown mercy to a stranger had found his soulmate in the most unexpected of places. Some love stories are written in the stars. Others are written in courage, in choice, in the willingness to risk everything for the chance at something real. Their story was both, and it was beautiful. The end. For those of you over 60 reading this story, may you remember that it's never too late to choose love over fear, passion over propriety, truth over comfort. May you find the courage to follow your heart, even when the world tells you you're too old, too set in your ways, too responsible to take such risks. Clara and Zane remind us that true love recognizes no boundaries, not of age, race, or social standing. The most meaningful life is one lived authentically, surrounded by those who see and value your true self. May you have the courage to embrace your own great love, whatever form it takes. May you never be too afraid or too proper to reach for happiness. For the woman who survived the desert night, may you always remember that the darkest moments can lead to the most brilliant dawns. For the warrior who defied his world to save a child, may you always know that one act of compassion can echo through generations. And for all those who dare to love across divides, who choose hearts over rules, who build bridges instead of walls, may you find the courage to write your own story, regardless of what the world says is possible. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply remember. Do you remember me? And answer, yes, I remember. I choose you always. In the end, love is always worth the risk. Always. With all our gratitude, the Wild West Lone Hearts. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope Clara and Zane's story stirred your heart and reminded you that love knows no boundaries, no time, no race, no reputation. If you felt something real while reading, please leave us a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. Your encouragement is what keeps us going, creating more stories full of love, redemption, and emotional twists. And don't go yet. At the end of this video, you'll see a recommendation for another story from our channel. Click and be surprised. You may just discover your next favorite love story. Wild West Lone Hearts.